Hello and welcome. Jub here, back with some World of Warships Legends. And today, I want to talk about the Tier 2 cruiser, the St. Louis. The St. Louis is a hard-bodied, high hit point cruiser bristling with 14 guns in sponsons throughout the hull. Its HE damage is low to moderate, and its AP damage is high. Its reload rate is again moderate compared to the rest of the cruisers at Tier 2, and its range is at the top end. For Commander, I choose Norman Scott, and as you can see, with a rather offensive build. For inspirations, I have chosen Francesco Membelli and Charles Madden, as I believe the fire rate increase is incredibly important. However, there is something to be said by buffing its already powerful AP, and if that was the case, you could run Luchins and Yamamoto. You could use George Dewey. If so, I would recommend something like this. For inspiration, I would use Cunningham and Membelli. While I do rate Thomas Kincaid, I think the pressure and offensive capabilities that Norman Scott adds is simply too good to turn down. However, if I had Azure Lane Baltimore, I would consider using her as a commander instead. So in summary, the St. Louis is a slow but maneuverable ship with plenty of firepower to bear when commanded by Norman Scott is a considerable threat. I've come across an interesting story with the St. Louis, and I'd like to share that while I'll show you some footage of a game that I played earlier. The third United States Navy ship to be named St. Louis, or cruiser number 20, was laid down on the 31st of July, 1902, at Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, by Neffie and Levy Co., and was launched on the 6th of May, 1905. It was sponsored by Miss Gladys B. Smith and was commissioned on the 18th of August, 1906, with Captain Nathaniel R. Usher in command. The St. Louis completed her trials along the Virginia coast from the 1st of February to the 22nd of March, 1907. From there she set forth on the west coast of the United States, where she commenced in training exercises, troop transport, and special services. She continued this work until the 14th of November 1909, where she was then placed in reserve. She was decommissioned at 11 a.m. on the 3rd of May 1910 at Puget Sound Naval Yard. St. Louis was then recommissioned in reserve on the 9th of October 1911, at which point she joined the Pacific Reserve Fleet on the 12th of March. Into the following year, from the 14th of July 1912 to the 26th of April 1913, St. Louis operated in the support of the Oregon Naval Militia, continuing work in much the same vein as before she was decommissioned. She transported troops, supported convoys, and kept close to American shores. The seasoned ship then set out from the Navy Yard and commenced her next assignment as a receiving ship at a naval training station in San Francisco on the 27th of April 1914. St. Louis was again placed onto Fleet Reserve from the 17th of February 1916 and dispatched from that fleet on the 10th of July 1916. The St. Louis sailed from Puget Sound on the 21st of July for Honolulu, arriving at Pearl Harbor on the 29th of July. She commenced her next assignment as the tender for the Submarine Division 3, with additional duties as the station ship at Pearl Harbor, and helped train the Hawaiian Naval Militia. Just before World War I broke out, the Germans dispatched light cruiser Königsberg on a voyage that carried her to the East African waters. As the war clouds loomed, Königsberg relieved the German unprotected cruiser the Gear, which had intermittently operated in that region. The Gear set out across the Indian Ocean for the German colony of Qingdao in China. When the fighting began, she was steaming en route. However, the ship eluded Allied patrols and managed to slip into Honolulu Harbour in October of 1914, where she was subsequently interred by the United States. German reservists and agents secretly utilized the ship for their operations, and the Americans grew increasingly suspicious of their activity. Emotions ran hot during the war, and as stated by Lieutenant Albert J. Porter of the ship's company, who penned the commemorative war log of the USS St. Louis, he observed, "The Germans violated neutrality with characteristic Hun disregard for international law and accepted honour codes." The Greer corvette captain, Kurt Grasshoff, in command, lay at Pier 3, moored to the also interned German steamer, the Pomeran. When a column of smoke began to rise from her stack early in the morning of the 4th of February 1917, being that the ship's internment prohibited her from getting steam up, and the Americans suspected the Germans' intentions. Lieutenant Commander Victor S. Houston, St. Louis's commanding officer, held an urgent conference on board the cruiser at which Commander Thomas C. Hart, commander of the Subdivision 3, represented the Commandant. Houston ordered St. Louis to clear for action and sent a boarding party led by Lieutenant Roy Lee C. Stover, Lieutenant Robert A. Hall, and Chief Gunner Frank C. Whisker. The sailors disembarked at the head of the Alakia Wharf and took up position in the second story of the pier warehouse. Soldiers from the nearby Schofield Barracks meanwhile arrived and deployed a battery of 3-inch field pieces screened by a coal pile across the street from the pier, where they could command the deck of the German ship. Smoke poured in great plumes from the Gear, and her crewmen's actions persuaded the Americans that the Germans were likely intending to escape from the harbour. While some of the boarding party feared that failing the sortie, the Germans might scuttle the ship with charges, and the ensuing blaze could destroy part of the waterfront. The boarding party therefore split up into 3 sections, and boarded and seized the Pomeran, and Hart and Stover then boarded the Gear and informed Grasshoff that they intended to take possession of the cruiser and extinguish her blaze in order to protect the harbour. Grasshoff vigorously protested, but his wily efforts to delay the boarders failed, and the rest of the St. Louis sailors swarmed on board. The Blue Jackets swiftly took stations forward, amidships and aft, and posted sentries at all of the hatches and watertight doors, blocking any of the Germans from passing. Grasshoff surrendered, and the Americans rounded up his unresisting men. First Lieutenant Randolph T. Zane of the U.S. Marine Corps arrived with a detachment of Marines, and they led the prisoners under guard to Schofield Barracks for internment. Whisker took some of his men below to the magazines, where they found shrapnel fuses scattered about, ammunition hoists dismantled, and floodcocks battered into uselessness. The Germans also cunningly hid their wrenches and spans in hopes of forestalling the American repairs. Stover, in the meantime, hastened with a third section, and they discovered a fire of wood and oil-soaked waste under a dry boiler. The blaze had spread to the deck above, and the woodwork of the fire room also caught by heat, thrown off by the incandescent boiler. And the woodwork of the magazine bulkhead had begun to catch fire. The boarders could not douse the flames with water because of the likelihood of exploding the dry boiler. But they let out the lines from the bow and the stern of the burning ship and skillfully warped her around the slip to the east side of Pier 4. The Honolulu Fire Department rushed chemical engines to the scene, and the firemen and sailors worked ferociously, cutting holes through the deck to facilitate dousing of the flames with their chemicals. The Americans extinguished the blaze by 5 p.m, and then a detachment of Subdivision 3, led by Lieutenant Norman L. Kirk, who commanded the K-3 submarine number 30, relieved the exhausted men. The Germans all but wrecked the gear, and their wanton work further damaged the engines, the steam lines, the oil lines, auxiliaries, navigational instruments, and even the wardroom, which Porter described as being in a shambles. The United States Navy, nevertheless, refitted the gear for service, renamed her to the Scores on the 9th of June, and commissioned the prize on the 15th of September 1917, with Commander Arthur Crenshaw in command. At which point the warship escorted Allied vessels, and during one such voyage they were struck by the merchant ship Florida on the starboard side, which resulted in the loss of 1 crew member and 12 others injured. The survivors abandoned ship, and the Scores sunk in about 3 hours. The Scores was stricken from the Navy list on the 26th of August 1918. The St. Louis, meanwhile, lay off of Honolulu during the morning watch on the 6th of April 1917, when she received the electrifying news of the United States' entry into World War I. Well, that's it for now. So if you enjoyed hearing about the history of the St. Louis, and please hit that like button. If you've got anything to say, put it in the comments below. And if you want to hear more history about the ships in World of Warships, then hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.